Hello there, welcome back to Jennie Designs with Paper and this week's episode of Crime and Coloring, where we take an alphabetical journey through the United States and revisit some of the earliest crimes. But before we talk crime, let's talk coloring. So today I'm going to be using this stamp set. Let me see if I can find the packaging here. It is a My Favorite Things Hang Out and Celebrate stamp set. I'm also going to be using the My Favorite Things Wonky Stitch rectangle dies. I have some Neenah Classic Crest Solar White cardstock, 80 pound. I've got some Gina K Masking Magic and 5 different colored cardstock pieces to make card bases. I'm going to make 5 cards. I'm going to stamp each of these sloth images onto that Neenah cardstock, and then I'm going to do a little bit of masking for the images as well, some ink blending around them, and create a kind of sort of clean and simple card. The cardstock will be, it's not a one-layer card, let's put it that way. There will be some color added to the cards with the card base. I will be trimming these panels down after I have done all the coloring. For the coloring, I'm using Copic markers. I've used the E50 series for the sloths and some other colors. I will link those color combinations over on the coordinating blog post, which will be linked down below. This story is long. I will also tell you that it does involve sexual assault. I will not graphically describe it, but that is the part of the crime at hand. So if this is not something that you want to listen to, please mute and just watch the coloring. I think that's all about the coloring, so let's go ahead and hop on into our crime. Our alphabetical journey today takes us to Vermont. As you probably know, in 1777, the colonies were embattled in the Revolutionary War in the attempt to gain independence from Great Britain. Go United States. Vermont, however, was quietly moving in their own direction, first becoming an independent state. It wasn't that they didn't want to be part of the newly created United States of America. It's that New York State didn't want Vermont to be a state. It took 14 years and a $30,000 payment to New York State before Vermont was allowed to become a state on March 4th, 1791, as the 14th state of the United States of America. Vermont is obviously, wow, that was hard, the largest producer of maple syrup in the United States. Vermont cow-to-people ratio is the nation's highest at 3.8 humans to every cow. Maybe that's why Vermont is the headquarters of Ben & Jerry's. The Von Trapp family settled in Stowe, Vermont in 1942. Mud season is a real season between the end of winter and the full-on spring season. The melting snow leaves the ground wet and muddy, and this led to the creation of mud rooms, a room with floor mats that were covered that could be easily removed and washed out. Now, I don't know that Vermont invented mud rooms, but my research did indicate that most every home in Vermont has some type of mud room. Also in Vermont, the winters are so long that there is an unusually high amount of indoor water parks, where residents and visitors alike spend their winter vacations. And just because Vermont needed to be even more extra, it is home to the world record grilled cheese sandwich. This sandwich measured 5 by 10.5 feet, weighing 320 pounds. And in Vermont, we find an old story that is the epitome of blame thy neighbor. We'll just call it that, blame thy neighbor. I also kind of want to point out that in the beginning of their statehood, Vermont was known to be kind of soft on crime. They modeled their justice system after Great Britain, but they, in that model, everything was a crime. There was a punishment for everything, and the punishment from skipping school to working on the Sabbath to burglary and murder was almost the same. So Vermont decided to kind of change this around a little bit, and they became a little bit more soft on crime than their model. They actually created a point in time where only 3 crimes would be harshly punished. That was burglary, rape, and murder. Those crimes were swiftly published, almost retaliatory as opposed to judiciously. Vermont state originally did not build any state prisons. They used county jails to hold prisoners, and most of those prisoners were debtors. You were sent to debtor's prison if you could not pay a debt, and you only spent the night there. You got out of jail during the day to go work to pay off your debt. So even this kind of floored me. They used branding or tattooing as a form of punishment, like TH for horse thief, right? On the forehead or the hand, like by the base of the thumb. So that was just weird. And this kind of judicial preview for the state of Vermont made the story that I found to tell you today even weirder to me. It just was kind of odd. So there is a lot to unpack here. And this is going to be at least a 2-day story because there is a lot to unpack here. This goes over the course of a couple of years, and it even crosses state lines. So we are going to start today with Marietta Ball. So Marietta was the 7th of 9 children born to George Washington and Emily Hamilton Ball. The parents have some kind of famous names. Marietta was born on June 18th, 1854 in Fairfield, Vermont. Now, life for George and Emily was hard. Their first child, a son, died at birth. Their second child, also a son, died before his second birthday. And then Emily died at age 41 in 1862, leaving George to raise the rest of his children, the other 7 of his children. He never remarried. And it seemed like his relationship with his children was as good or better than average at the time. There were no reports of animosity or neglect. They just seemed to get along. George worked as a butcher and a produce seller in St. Albans, Vermont. Now, while growing up there, Marietta was in training to become a dressmaker. And one evening in probably 1871, Marietta, burst into her family home. She was out of breath. She'd been running, and she exclaimed to her father that someone had not only been following her, but chasing her as she strolled through the town on her evening constitutional. She's walking through town, and then she's being chased. Surprisingly, because of Vermont's, crime, nothing happened. I don't know if it wasn't reported or if it was reported and never investigated, but nothing happened. And Marietta refused to stop her daily walks. She said, quote, "Whom should I fear? I have injured no one, and what have I that anyone should want?" So I haven't hurt anybody's feelings. I don't have anything to steal, so why am I going to not keep walking? Why would I change my day-to-day pattern? So fast forward to 1874. Marietta did not become a dressmaker, and as a 20-year-old spinster, instead took a job as the local school teacher at number 2 school, the schoolhouse that was located at the intersection of Hill Road and an unnamed track that ran south to the Fairfield Road. Can we just unpack that at 20 years old, she was a spinster? Oh, I have mercy. I was 20 when I got married, but I felt like I was young when I got married. Oh, wow. This school was too far from Marietta's family home where she lived with her father for her to go to every day. So she ended up living with a farmer named Wanton Abel during the week. His children attended the school. And then on weekends, she spent at the Page home with her friend Clara Page. It was her habit to leave the Abel home in the morning, the Abel home. Sorry, there's a lot of names in here that are the same. To leave Wanton Abel's home in the morning and walk through the neighborhood and the neighboring farms on the way to the schoolhouse. She was regularly seen. It was not considered odd. It just was what it was. Marietta was very well liked on the Hill, capital H, because this was considered not necessarily an official town name, but the description of the town. Anyway, Marietta was very well liked on the Hill. She had very few problems with the students or the families in the area. The only exception that people reported was an incident when she disciplined one of the children from a French-Canadian family called the Revors, Revors. This issue wasn't specified, but it was severe enough that Marietta wasn't exactly comfortable staying with the Abel family even on the weekends. I guess one thing we need to stop and note here is that there was a mill, and I think it began as a lumber mill, and then it transitioned into other things through time, because it was called a couple of different things. So I think there's a transition there. And a lot of the workers at this mill were French Canadian. And because Marietta had this issue with this French Canadian family and her disciplining their son, she didn't really want to spend her weekends at Wanton Abel's house, which is why she would go spend the weekends with her friend at the Pages farm. Generally, though, she was well-liked by the pupils and their parents, and she was sociable. It was noted that she went to local and social activities, including in neighboring towns, like dances, right? So yeah, and another side note is that the mill was owned by Aldous Brainerd. So lots of people in motion here. Now, at this point in time, they went to school through the summer. I think this was kind of when the school year started in January after the winter holiday, and then went clear through the summer until maybe harvest time. But anyway, on Friday, July 24th, 1874, Marietta dismissed school. She sent the children home. She closed up the school for the weekend. She packed her personal belongings that she carried with her on Fridays from Wanton Abel's home so that she would have them at her friend, the Page farm. So it was like a bag that had like her nightshirt and her toiletries and things like that, a change of clothes, stuff like that. And once she had locked up the school, she headed down the road to the Page farm, which was about 1.5 miles from the school. Most Fridays, Marietta walked with the Collins children. I think, if my memory is correct, the Collins farm was the last farm she would have stopped at or passed before she got to the Page farm. And at about 3:30 on that Friday, she stopped at the Collins home, sent the children into their home so their mother would know they were there, and then continued onward to the Page farm. Only she never arrived. Her friend Clara was initially uncomfortable with Marietta, taking longer to get there than average. But she did console herself with the idea that Marietta was a young woman. Maybe she had a social call to make or an invitation that was extended to her. And she was sure that by Saturday she would hear from Marietta. And then Saturday morning turned into Saturday afternoon, and Clara was even more concerned. And then she recalled the conversation she'd had with Marietta the weekend before. On Monday the 20th, Marietta and Claire woke up and it was raining. So Clara offered to drive her friend into the school as opposed to having her walk. So Marietta says, heck yeah, I don't want to walk 1.5 miles in the rain. And the two women set off in a carriage and they went north through the fields and the clearings. So at one point in their journey, Clara said that they saw a man off in the distance. And it seemed as he was crossing the farms and the fields toward them and toward the road, and that he was getting closer and closer to them. And the women expected that they would intersect when this man got to the road. And when Clara's carriage got to the point that they thought they would intersect, the man wasn't there. And the idea that he was missing frightened Clara. Like, her spidey sense was tingling. She did not like it. So, she thought the man was hiding, lying in wait. So they get to the school, and Marietta goes inside to begin the school day. But Clara, she sent a message to her husband to come and escort her home. She did not want to take that 1.5 mile ride back home by herself, not knowing where this man, whom she didn't know or recognize, was located. So here they are 5 days later, and Marietta still has not shown up to Clara's home. So Clara has hitched her wagon and ridden down the road to the Collins farm to verify that Marietta had in fact stopped there with the children on Friday. And when she got there, they said, well, yeah, Marietta dropped the kids off here and regular time and headed off down the road. And Clara was like, okay, red flags. I'm throwing all the red flags. Something is wrong here. It's getting dark. I still don't know where my friend is. So a search party was organized. So many of the local men, including Clara's husband, Foster Page, gathered together to look for this loved school teacher. Also included in the search party was a man named Frank Harris. Frank was a former slave who rented a home on the Page's farm. So he rented a house there. So the search party went south from the Collins farm. And near dark, they discovered a place that indicated that somebody had kind of created a place for an ambush, or like they were hiding somewhere. So what they found was that there was this bush, and the branches on the back, from the backside of the road, had been cut off, so somebody could sit and hide there without being seen from the road. What else they noticed was that the fence rail behind this bush showed signs of having been whittled in with like a knife. So somebody's sitting there waiting, and they're cutting into this fence post with their pocket knife. And also they found some carpet fibers and some willow withes, so some branches from a willow. Now, this ambush site was about 1/3 of a mile south of the Collins farm and about 30 paces north of a dry stream bed that was covered by a plank bridge, like a single plank bridge. Near the bridge, the searchers spotted a crude mask that had been hid underneath a rock, like partially stuck underneath a stone. This mask had been cut from a carpet, and it was kind of cone-shaped, and it had eyes for the nose and the mouth, and then it had willow withers to tie it together. And this carpet reeked of like damp, old barn, rotten hay kind of stuff. It didn't smell great. So it was not somebody's favorite rug for sure. As the night began to get darker and darker, the men lit the lanterns and continued to search, and they spread out one from another so they could cover more ground, and they headed toward the woods. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, so this would be 1 o'clock Sunday morning, Frank Harris shouted out a cry, and everybody came running to join him at a stand of broken timber about 80 yards east of the road. And the scene was not the outcome they were expecting or hoping for. What they found was a body laying beside a birch tree stump, and it was Marietta. She appeared to have been arranged like she was being buried, like her arms were at her sides, her ankles were neatly crossed. Her hat was next to her and damaged, but her skirts were torn and disarrayed, and her overskirt was pulled up over her face. So side quest here to kind of describe typical clothing for women of the time. Women wore bloomers, then they had a petticoat, and then an underskirt that was typically like a plain color, and then on the top, there would have been like some kind of corset, and then a shirt or a blouse, and then an overskirt. And the shirt or blouse and the overskirt were typically the parts of the outfit that you saw the color and the pattern would be found. So many, 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 many layers. Back to our story. Side quest completed. Nobody touched the body. Like they're like, clearly she is not alive. There's no reason for us to touch anything. We just need to call the authorities. So a messenger was sent to the village to summon authorities, and the men settled in to wait. They actually kept watch over Marietta all night through the rest of the night into the morning until the authorities could get there. And it was about 4 o'clock in the morning before they did arrive. Marietta's body was then placed in a wagon and transported back to the Page farmhouse, where a coroner's inquest was opened under the direction of H. Farnsworth. Now, here is where a lack of training may have been part of the problem with the rest of the story. And I say part of because I think there were lots of problems here. H. Farnsworth was not a doctor. He was the individual in charge of the inquest, but he was a carpenter turned business insuranceman. He was currently the justice of the peace for St. Albans, but he had no legal training, and his experience as a criminal investigator was incredibly limited. Gratefully, the autopsy was conducted by doctors. There was a Dr. Fassett and a Dr. Hall that performed the autopsy, and it took the better part of the morning. They determined that Marietta was killed by a blunt instrument, probably a rock. Her skull was broken and caved in on one side. The bones of her left hand were shattered, like a defensive move, like she had put her hand up and the rock had hit her hand. She was sexually assaulted and then murdered. There were a number of bruises and scratches all over her body where she had been dragged through the underbrush. As the autopsy was taking place, news was starting to spread through the farms on the hill and then down through the village. So St. Albans had this village area where kind of the more wealthy people lived, and then the hill area where the middle to lower income families lived. And Aldous Bernard was the mill owner, and he heard this terrible, terrible news. He left the home and headed in the village and headed to the hill. His father was actually a senator and the former governor of Vermont. Aldous had been an officer in the Union Army. He served as a marshal for Vermont during the Gettysburg exercise when Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address. So he had some policing experience at least, right? So he gets to the Page farm and he kind of takes control of the evidence investigation, like the evidence collection. He gathered up all the people that were hanging around after Marietta had been taken back to the Page's farm and sent them back through the woods. Like in my brain, I'm thinking, Aldous gathered up all the rubberneckers, because that is a thing we see here where I live. If there's anything going on the side of the road, everybody slows down to a crawl so they can see what's going on. Anyway, Aldous collected all of these people, and they went back through the woods in the daylight now, looking for clues to see if they could figure out who had brought this ugly crime to St. Albans and the hill. So while they were searching, they came across blood, a footprint, a fragment of hair ribbon, and a broken watch that was identified as Marietta's that stopped at 4:20. And this indicated to both the doctor, H. Farnsworth, and Aldous that likely this was the time of her death, especially given that the last time she was seen was about 3:30 in the afternoon. So evidence at the scene also indicated that the killer sat in wait, waiting for Marietta to pass and attacked her from behind, the ambush spot. There was also evidence that showed that when Marietta was surprised by her ambusher or her attacker, she ran and then was accosted and dragged across the single plank bridge over this dry stream, attacked, and then attacked again. And because it was July, the stream had no water in it, and so the signs of fight and flight were evident in the daylight as they looked. The area showed that they hit the ground together, so he tackled her. The attacker tackled Marietta, and they wrestled in the gravel of the ditch or the stream bed. And it was assumed by evidence collected or noted at the scene that Marietta fought hard. The evidence also seemed to indicate that she ripped the mask off of the man and likely scratched at him. I guess that was collected at autopsy. That type of evidence would have been collected at autopsy. And it appeared that she had been hit with the rock more than one time, like hit until she stopped fighting back. So after the removal of the mask, clearly the attacker was afraid of being discovered, which is probably why they found the mask hiding under a rock near but not at the same location as the body. After she was dead, it seemed from drag marks and such that she had been drug farther away from the bank of the stream, farther into the woods. And it also seemed as though whoever was attacking her had to stop and rest a few times. Like they were exhausted, worn out, beat up, whatever, whatever. And the assumption was that the attacker did not intend to kill Marietta, thus the mask. But once she removed the mask, it was likely that he felt no other choice. Now, let's be honest, there's always a choice, but, he felt like he had no choice because she had seen his face. And the next steps showed that he either had guilt over his actions or he was still fearing discovery because he covered her head and face with what was left of her overskirt. And then he crossed her ankles, but he stole her belongings, the bag that had her pajamas and a change of clothes and things for the day. And then they traced him into the woods, through some fields, and clearly avoiding the roads, and then they lost him. Now, this was not the first time this summer that St. Albans and the Hill had been dealing with crime. In fact, there had been an unusual uptick in crime. The week before Marietta's murder, another resident, Joe Menard, he was a French-Canadian man, he was attacked and killed at his business. There were reports of breaking and entering and vandalism into local businesses. And the people living in St. Albans on the Hill were just feeling less than comfortable in their usually crime-free town. And now the murder of Marietta just had everyone up in arms. And you know what comes next? The rumors, the accusations, the finger pointing, the imprisonment, let's arrest everybody and figure it all out in the end. And that's kind of what happened. The town offered a reward of $3,000. That's almost $73,000 in today's money. For information leading to an arrest. Wasn't even a conviction, just leading to an arrest. And a criminal inquiry was launched under H.H. Farnsworth's direction with the assistance of Sheriff Price and a couple of the other town officials. Now, Frank Harris, the man who found Marietta's body, was, of course, the first member of the town to fall to suspicion. And a lot of that was because he was a freed slave. So he lived in a cottage on the Page farm, and one of the town's members claimed that the rug in Frank's rented home matched the carpet that the mask was made out of, and she knew this because they were part of the rug that belonged to her at one point in time. And the article I read did not name the woman. Frank was taken to the local jail, but all reports indicated this was more for his safety because there were reports of a lynching mob heading toward his home. The next day, his alibi was confirmed, he was released, and he left the area and didn't return for more than a decade. He's like, yeah, nope, I'm out. The next arrest was an older French-Canadian, here's my air quotes, you can't see, tramp, a drifter, a wanderer, who lived around the hill. He was also released when his alibi was quickly proved. The Revore family was investigated because of their falling out with Marietta over the discipline of their son at school, and that also proved to be a dead end. The next real promising lead came from a neighboring town. A stranger appeared in Richford on the morning of Monday, July 27th, asking the way to Canada, and this stranger mentioned the murder in St. Albans, but that was the first anybody in Richford had heard of that murder. So he had information nobody else had. And his appearance closely matched that of an unnamed former freight conductor who had tried courting Marietta about a year before her murder, but she had rejected him and the man had made threats against her. Word of this had reached the railway, and then he was fired from working with the railroad. And it's kind of unclear from the reports if the man in Richford was in fact that rejected suitor. But anyway, investigators were able to find the freight conductor, and he had an alibi. So there goes another dead end. Marietta's funeral was held on the 27th of July. The service took place at her father George's house. George was beyond himself with grief. Like I mentioned before, his life had not been easy at all with the death of his first two children, and then his wife, and then his sons moved to California. So he was now burying one of his children again. And it wasn't just that that part of his life had been hard. He hadn't been especially financially successful either. He actually was at this point dependent on the income of his 3 daughters. His home was filled with furniture and belongings that had been purchased or donated through charity shops. Now, George's grief turned to anger, and anger begets vengeance, and he wanted the murderer of his daughter caught and sentenced, or better, dead. But George did not believe the killer was a resident of the hill. He thought that even with a mask, a local resident would have been too recognizable to Marietta. And so George figured that the mask was there to prevent Marietta from being able to describe her attacker to authorities. He was so sure the attacker was not from the hill, but actually a resident of the village. Now, other residents of the hill agreed. But the lead investigator, H.H. Fleming, continued to look closely at anybody who lived on the hill. H.H., I don't know his real name. I didn't look it up. I just went with H.H., was aided in his investigation by Private Detective Noble Flanagan. Noble was a former sheriff and police chief and was one of the more premier investigators in the Champlain area. Noble happened to be in the area on unrelated business, and when hearing about Marietta's death, he offered his services. They also had help from a rather unlikely source, a medium, a lady named Lacey Cook, who went by the name of Sleeping Lucy. And Lucy told H.H. that the spirits told her that Marietta's attacker was someone from the mill and that he would have scratches on his face. And as luck would have it, when they went to question the mill workers, they did indeed find a man, his last name was LePage, with scratches on his face. And they looked into him and his scratches and his alibi, and some other mill workers said, yeah, we were all out picking berries, and that's how come his face is all scratched up. So there goes another, just down the tubes, right? 3 weeks after the murder, a town selectman released a public statement confirming that every person, man, woman, or child living within the distance of 1 mile in either direction from the scene of the murder has been subjected to a most thorough examination. So after the city council or town selectman has publicly stated that everybody who lived within a mile of the murder has been or will be investigated, the investigation continues, and the next person on the list is Marietta's landlord, Wanton Abel. Now, Wanton had known that Marietta walked to the Page farm on Friday afternoons, and he was unable to provide investigators with a credible alibi. He said that he had spent all afternoon working in his fields near the schoolhouse, but, quote, the heat must have got to me because he lay down and slept in the shade. Okay, whatever. Marietta was killed between 3:30 and 4:30 in the afternoon, at which time Wanton said that he was fast asleep. Not that anyone could prove that. Nobody saw him. But H.H. may have remained suspicious, but he had to release Wanton because there was no evidence proving that he was anywhere other than where he said he was. And Wanton naturally was upset, and he feared for his reputation and called on his friend and former employer, Aldous Brainerd, for advice. Now, when Wanton and Aldous are meeting, Aldous says to Alden, be careful, check out, pay attention, pay really close attention to all the comings and goings around your place. Keep a record of anybody you see, keep a record of anything suspicious, and report it. But don't report it to H.H., the guy in charge of the investigation. Report it back to me. Suspicious? Much? I mean, what? And if you think that's convenient, you would be right, because the next man that H.H. was investigating was a man named George Gregory Smith. We're going to call him G.G. because Marietta's dad is also George. Now, G.G. was Aldous' nephew. I had to make sure I had the family relation there right. So G.G. was Aldous Brainerd's nephew, and the oldest son of J. Gregory Smith, the former governor and a successful railway magnate. The Smith Mansion, where Gigi lived, not far down the road from the number 2 schoolhouse. So this investigation actually started pitting the residents of the Hill against the residents of the village. And the story circulating about Gigi and the murders was kind of interesting. According to rumor, the 29-year-old Gigi met Marietta at a dance at a hotel in Bakersfield. Now, one story said that Gigi had insulted Marietta. Another story said that Marietta had insulted Gigi. And nobody really knew which was the truth. But either way, this incident, insulting of each other, precipitated the events of July 24th. Marietta's father, George, was among those that firmly believed that Gigi was guilty. The Ball family was on familiar terms with the Smiths, but they were not overly friendly. And Marietta certainly did attend dances in Bakersfield. The story seemed plausible. It's possible that George Ball was also remembering this incident a couple years before her murder where somebody had chased Marietta through the streets of the village. That incident that, again, had never been investigated. Marietta's father, George, discussed the rumors with his friend, Dr. John Branch, a resident of the Hill, who took it upon himself to communicate George's suspicions to the authorities. Now, Detective Flanagan questioned Gigi and confirmed that the young man had an impeachable alibi for the time of the murder. Apparently, he was playing billiards with a friend at the Weldon House Hotel. Now, George, Dr. Branch, and even George and Dr. Branch didn't think that the alibi was particularly unimpeachable, as the Detective Flanagan had said. Like, they disagreed. And so they continued to spread the rumors. And this, unfortunately, made George a suspect in his daughter's murder. So it pitted George against the detectives. It put him in the spotlight. After Marietta's funeral, about a month later, like in August, at least one of her brothers, came from California to pay his respects and visit his father. And I think we're going to have to stop there and pick it up next week and maybe even 2 weeks, because this is not a short story, you all, but I did not know how to make it shorter. Like, there's a lot going on with this. So check out the cards, look at the fun little sloths. They're like my spirit animal, like especially on days when, like today, when I'm feeling super lazy and crime and coloring goes up, at the end of the day instead of the beginning of the day. So thanks for hanging out with me today. I hope I have you on. I know I left you at like this, what the heck is going on part, but I promise we'll wrap it up. So thanks for hanging out with me today. Watch a couple of these other videos. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and have a really fabulous day.